A young black boy named Marcus, 12 years old, notices a little girl named Lily upset after her favorite toy breaks. Feeling compassion, he offers to fix it for her, turning what could have been a sad moment into a heartwarming act of kindness. What Marcus doesn't realize is that his small gesture will lead to life-changing consequences far beyond what anyone could have imagined. So, how does Marcus's generosity transform the situation? And what surprising turn of events will follow? Stick around to find out. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy this tale, don't forget to subscribe. In the heart of Maplewood, a small town where everyone knew their neighbors by name, lived a remarkable boy named Marcus Walker. At just 12 years old, Marcus had already earned a reputation as the go-to handyman for the community. His nimble fingers and keen eye for detail allowed him to breathe new life into broken objects, from rusty bicycles to finicky radios. Marcus's home, a modest two-bedroom house on Elm Street, stood in stark contrast to the grand houses lining the nearby Riverview Drive. Despite their humble circumstances, Marcus and his mother, Sarah, always wore smiles on their faces and warmth in their hearts. One sunny Saturday morning, as Marcus was working on a broken lawnmower in his makeshift workshop, his mom called from the kitchen. "Marcus, honey, can you help Mrs. Green with her toaster again?" Marcus poked his head out of the garage and smiled. "Sure, Mom. I'll be right there." As Marcus trotted down the street with his toolbox in hand, he waved at familiar faces. Mr. Johnson, who was tending to his garden, tipped his hat and said, "There goes our little fixer-upper." Marcus grinned, his gap-toothed smile radiating pure joy. There was nothing he loved more than the satisfaction of fixing something, of seeing the relief and happiness on people's faces when he solved their problems. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away on Riverview Drive, a different scene was unfolding. In a sprawling Victorian house with perfectly manicured lawns, 7-year-old Lily Patterson sat on her bedroom floor, tears streaming down her cherubic face. "Oh, sweetie, don't cry," her mother, Amelia Patterson, said, kneeling beside her daughter. "We'll figure something out." Lily clutched a delicate porcelain music box to her chest. The lid was slightly askew, and no matter how many times she wound the key, not a single note played. This wasn't just any music box. It was a precious gift from her grandmother, who had passed away the previous year. "But Grandma gave it to me," Lily hiccuped between sobs. "She said it would always play music for me when I missed her." Robert Patterson, Lily's father, entered the room, his brow furrowed with concern. He had just returned from a long day at work in his crisp business suit. "What's the matter, Princess?" he asked, crouching down next to his wife and daughter. Amelia explained the situation, and Robert gently took the music box from Lily's hands. He examined it closely, turning it this way and that, but the intricate mechanism inside was beyond his understanding. "How about we take it to that antique shop in the city?" Amelia suggested. "They might be able to fix it." Robert shook his head. "That could take weeks, and there's no guarantee they won't damage it further." He paused, an idea forming. "You know, I heard some of the neighbors talking about a young boy who's good with repairs. Maybe we could ask him to take a look." Lily's eyes widened with hope. "Really, Daddy? Do you think he could fix it?" Robert smiled, ruffling his daughter's blonde curls. "It's worth a try, sweetheart. Why don't we go find him right now?" Hand in hand, the Patterson family walked down Riverview Drive, crossing the invisible boundary that separated their affluent neighborhood from the more modest part of town. As they turned onto Elm Street, they saw a young boy walking in their direction, toolbox swinging at his side. "Excuse me," Robert called out. "We're looking for a boy who's good at fixing things. Would that happen to be you?" Marcus stopped, surprised to see such well-dressed people in his neighborhood. He nodded, a little shy but eager to help. "Yes, sir. I'm Marcus. What can I do for you?" Lily stepped forward, her blue eyes still glistening with tears. She held out the music box. "Can you fix this? It was my grandma's, and it won't play anymore." Marcus carefully took the music box, immediately noticing its delicate craftsmanship. He opened the lid, peering inside at the complex mechanism. It was unlike anything he had worked on before, but the challenge excited him. "I've never fixed a music box before," Marcus admitted honestly, "but I'd like to try if you'll let me." Robert knelt down to Marcus's eye level. Son, this music box means the world to my daughter. Are you sure you're up for the task? Marcus met Mr. Patterson's gaze with determination. I promise to do my very best, sir. I know how important special things can be. Lily, who had been hiding behind her father's legs, slowly emerged. She looked at Marcus with a mixture of hope and apprehension. You'll be careful with it, right? She asked in a small voice. Marcus's face softened as he addressed Lily directly. I'll treat it like it's the most precious thing in the world, he assured her, because I know that's what it is to you. Lily's lips curved into a tentative smile. She reached out and touched Marcus's hand lightly. Thank you, she whispered. As the Patterson family prepared to leave, Robert handed Marcus his business card. Please call us when you're finished, no matter the outcome, he said with a smile. And don't hesitate to reach out if you need any resources to complete the repair. Marcus nodded, clutching the music box carefully in his hands. He watched as the family walked away, Lily turning back to wave shyly. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his young shoulders, but it was a weight he welcomed. When Marcus walked through the front door of his modest home on Elm Street, the delicate music box in his hands felt like more than just a broken toy. It was a piece of someone's heart, a tangible link to cherished memories. Mom, I'm home, Marcus called out, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Sarah Walker emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes widened when she saw the ornate music box in her son's hands. What's that, honey? She asked, her voice full of curiosity. Marcus carefully placed the music box on the dining table and explained the situation to his mother. Sarah listened intently, her face softening with pride as she heard about her son's promise to help the little girl from Riverview Drive. Oh, Marcus, she said, pulling him into a warm hug. You've got such a big heart, just like your grandfather. Marcus's eyes lit up at the mention of his grandfather. I wish he was here, Mom. He'd know exactly how to fix this. Sarah cupped her son's face in her hands. He may not be here in person, but his spirit lives on in you, baby. And I know he'd be so proud of the young man you're becoming. With renewed determination, Marcus carefully carried the music box to his makeshift workshop in the garage. It was a cluttered space filled with spare parts, tools, and odd bits of junk. Some of the tools had been handed down by his grandfather, while others were acquired from yard sales and thrift stores. As Marcus settled onto his worn stool, he began to examine the music box more closely. The porcelain exterior was exquisite, painted with delicate flowers and gilded edges that spoke of a bygone era. But it was the intricate mechanism inside that both fascinated and intimidated him. All right, Marcus muttered to himself. Let's see what we're dealing with here. He carefully opened the lid, revealing a complex array of gears, springs, and levers. It was unlike anything he had ever worked on before. Marcus's brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to understand how all the pieces fit together. Hours ticked by as he tinkered with the music box, consulting old repair manuals his grandfather had left behind, watching online tutorials on his mom's tablet, and even calling Mr. Johnson from down the street, who had a penchant for antiques. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garage, Sarah peeked in to check on her son. She found Marcus hunched over his workbench, his face a mask of intense concentration. How's it going, sweetie? She asked softly, not wanting to startle him. Marcus looked up, frustration evident in his eyes. It's harder than I thought, Mom. There are so many tiny parts, and I'm afraid I'll break something if I'm not careful. Sarah walked over and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You know, your grandfather used to say that the toughest fixes are often the most rewarding. Why don't you take a break and have some dinner? A fresh perspective might help. Reluctantly, Marcus agreed. They sat down to a quiet dinner of reheated lasagna, but Sarah couldn't help but notice the faraway look in her son's eyes. What's on your mind, Marcus? She asked gently. Marcus pushed his food around his plate, deep in thought. I was just thinking about Lily. She looked so sad when she gave it to me. What if I can't fix it, Mom? What if I let her down? Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her son's hand. Marcus, listen to me. The fact that you're trying so hard, that you care so much, that already means the world to that little girl and her family. Sometimes our best is all we can give, and that's more than enough. Her words seemed to lift some of the weight from Marcus's shoulders. He finished his dinner with renewed energy and headed back to the garage, determined to make progress. In the Patterson household, Lily lay in her bed, unable to sleep. She clutched her favorite stuffed animal, a well-worn teddy bear, and stared at the empty spot on her nightstand where the music box usually sat. "Do you think he'll be able to fix it, Teddy?" she whispered to her bear, missing the lullaby her grandmother used to sing to her. Amelia, passing by her daughter's room, overheard the one-sided conversation and paused in the doorway, her heart aching for her little girl. "Emily, sweetie," she called softly. "Are you still awake?" Lily sat up, nodding. Amelia crossed the room and perched on the edge of the bed, gathering her daughter into her arms. "I know you're worried about your music box," Amelia said, stroking Lily's hair gently. "But remember what Grandma always said. Have faith in the goodness of others." Lily nodded against her mother's chest. "Marcus seems nice," she murmured. "He promised to be careful." Amelia smiled. "That's right. And do you know what else? Sometimes when things break, they come back even stronger than before, just like people." With that, Lily felt comforted, the words soothing her restless mind. She drifted off to sleep, comforted by the thought that things would work out. As the night wore on, Marcus faced setback after setback. A tiny spring snapped as he tried to reposition it. A gear refused to align properly, and the more he worked, the more impossible the task seemed. In a moment of frustration, Marcus pushed away from the workbench, his eyes stinging with the threat of tears. He was about to give up when his gaze fell on an old photograph pinned to the wall. It showed a younger version of himself, maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing proudly next to his grandfather. They were both covered in grease, grinning widely as they posed in front of an old radio they had just fixed together. The memory of that day came flooding back to Marcus. He remembered how many times they had almost given up, but his grandfather had always encouraged him to keep trying. "When you hit a wall, Marcus," his grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. "That's when you've got to get clever. There's always a solution. Sometimes you just need to look at the problem from a different angle." Inspired by the memory, Marcus took a deep breath and returned to the music box. This time, instead of focusing on the individual parts that weren't working, he tried to understand how they all fit together as a whole. As the first rays of dawn began to peek through the garage windows, Marcus had a breakthrough. He realized that the main problem wasn't a broken part at all. It was that the entire mechanism had shifted slightly out of alignment over the years. With steady hands and bated breath, Marcus carefully adjusted the positioning of the gears and springs. He wound the key, his heart pounding in anticipation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like magic, a soft, tinkling melody filled the air. Marcus's face split into a wide grin. He had done it. The music box was playing again, its sweet notes a testament to his perseverance and skill. "Mom! Mom, come quick!" Marcus shouted, unable to contain his excitement. Sarah came running into the garage, still in her pajamas. When she heard the music playing, her eyes filled with tears of pride. "Oh, Marcus," she whispered, pulling him into a tight hug. "You did it, baby. You really did it." As they stood there, listening to the delicate melody, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything he had experienced before. He had faced a challenge, persevered through difficulties, and emerged victorious. More importantly, he had made a real difference in someone's life. The rest of the morning was spent carefully cleaning and polishing the music box. Marcus oiled the hinges so the lid opened smoothly and made sure every note played perfectly. As he worked, he couldn't stop smiling, imagining the joy on Lily's face when she heard her grandmother's lullaby once more. As Marcus prepared to return the music box, Sarah helped him wrap it carefully in a soft cloth. She looked at her son, noticing how he seemed to have grown taller overnight, his eyes shining with newfound confidence. "You know," Sarah said softly, "your grandfather always said you had a special gift. He knew you'd do great things one day." Marcus ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. "I just hope Lily likes it," he mumbled. Sarah chuckled, ruffling his hair. "Oh, I think she'll more than like it. You've given her back a piece of her heart, Marcus. That's no small thing." With the music box carefully cradled in his arms, Marcus set off for Riverview Drive. The warm summer sun bathed his face, and with each step, he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The weight of his accomplishment seemed light in his hands, but the thought of Lily's reaction made his heart race. As Marcus approached the grand houses lining the street, he couldn't help but feel a little out of place. The perfectly manicured lawns and towering pillars of the Patterson family's home were far from his own modest neighborhood. Yet, the memory of Lily's hopeful face and Mr. Patterson's trust in him filled him with a newfound sense of purpose. When Marcus reached the Patterson household, he hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to expect. Before he could even reach the front door, it swung open, and there stood Lily. Her blue eyes were wide with anticipation, and she bounced on her toes, unable to contain her excitement. "Marcus!" she exclaimed, her voice full of hope. Is it ready?" Marcus couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "Why don't you see for yourself?" he said, carefully handing over the wrapped music box. With trembling hands, Lily unwrapped the cloth. The music box gleamed in the sunlight, its porcelain surface as pristine as it had been when it was first given to her. She glanced up at Marcus, her eyes shining with hope. He nodded encouragingly, holding his breath in anticipation. Lily opened the lid, and for a brief moment, there was silence. Then, as if by magic, the sweet, familiar notes of her grandmother's lullaby filled the air. Lily's eyes filled with tears of joy. She looked up at Marcus, her face radiant with happiness. "You fixed it," she whispered. "You really fixed it." Before Marcus could respond, Lily threw her arms around him in a tight hug. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she repeated, her voice muffled against his shirt. Marcus, slightly overwhelmed by her reaction, patted her back awkwardly. "I'm just glad I could help," he said softly. Just then, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of the music and their daughter's excited cries. When they saw the scene before them, Lily hugging Marcus and the repaired music box playing its sweet melody, they both lit up with gratitude and amazement. "Young man," Mr. Patterson said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've done more than just fix a music box. You've restored a piece of our family's history. How can we ever thank you?" Marcus suddenly felt shy in the face of such praise. He shrugged and smiled modestly. "I'm just glad I could help, sir. It was a challenge, but my grandfather always said that the toughest fixes are often the most rewarding." Mrs. Patterson wiped a tear from her eye. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man," she said softly. "He must be very proud of you." Marcus's smile turned a little sad. "He passed away a couple of years ago," he said quietly. "But I like to think he was watching over me while I worked on the music box." The Pattersons exchanged a glance, clearly moved by Marcus's words. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. "Marcus," he said, "we'd like to do something to show our appreciation. Would you and your mother join us for dinner tonight? We'd love to thank you properly." Marcus's eyes widened in surprise. "I'd have to ask my mom, but I'd like that, Mr. Patterson. Thank you." As Marcus turned to leave, promising to return that evening with his mother, he felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything he had experienced before. He had faced a challenge, persevered through difficulties, and emerged victorious. More importantly, he had made a real difference in someone's life. When Marcus arrived home, he found his mother waiting anxiously on the front porch. The moment she saw his beaming face, she knew the repair had been a success. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling him into a warm hug. "I'm so proud of you. Tell me everything." As they sat on the porch swing, Marcus recounted the events of the morning, the joy on Lily's face, the gratitude from the Pattersons, and the dinner invitation. Sarah listened intently, her heart swelling with pride for her son. "You know," she said softly, "your grandfather always said you'd do great things one day. I think this is just the beginning for you, Marcus." Marcus leaned against his mother, feeling both excited and a little overwhelmed by the events of the past day. "Do you think Grandpa would be proud?" he asked hesitantly. Sarah kissed the top of his head. "Oh, baby, he'd be over the moon. You've got his gift, not just for fixing things, but for helping people. That's a rare and precious thing." Later that evening, Marcus and his mother walked back to Riverview Drive to join the Pattersons for dinner. The thought of the warm meal and the kind family waiting for them made Marcus feel like he had crossed some invisible threshold. It was no longer just about fixing things. It was about making a difference, about being seen and appreciated for who he truly was. As they approached the Patterson household, Marcus felt a nervous flutter in his chest. The house, as grand as it was, suddenly felt like a place of belonging. The door opened before they could even ring the bell, and Lily greeted them with her usual bright smile. "Mom, Dad, this is Marcus," Lily said, practically bouncing with excitement. Mrs. Patterson ushered them inside, and the table was already set with a delicious spread. The Pattersons made sure to include Marcus in every conversation, treating him with the respect and kindness he hadn't realized he needed until now. As they sat down to eat, Mr. Patterson raised his glass. "To Marcus," he said, his voice full of gratitude, "for not only fixing a music box, but for restoring a piece of our hearts. We can't thank you enough." Marcus's heart swelled with warmth. "I'm just happy I could help," he said, his voice filled with emotion. That evening, as Marcus walked back home with his mother, a thought lingered in his mind. Maybe this was just the beginning of something bigger. There were so many broken things in the world, so many people who needed help. Maybe, just maybe, he could be the one to fix them. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, his thoughts wouldn't quiet down. He kept replaying the day's events over and over. Lily's joyful face when she heard her grandmother's lullaby play again, her tears of relief, and her gratitude that had filled the air like a warm embrace. The sound of the music box was still fresh in his mind, a symbol of something far more significant than just a mechanical repair. He had done something meaningful. His heart swelled with pride as he thought about the trust the Patterson family had placed in him, a boy from a modest neighborhood, someone who had never asked for anything in return but still had the courage to offer everything he could. Marcus had realized that day, for the first time, the true power of his skills. They weren't just tools to fix broken things. They were tools to rebuild lives. And for the first time, he felt like he truly understood his purpose. Marcus could still picture Lily's face when she hugged him. The look in her eyes had been so sincere, so full of hope, that it gave him a sense of fulfillment he couldn't put into words. And he realized something else. Fixing things was just part of what he could do. There was more to him than just a boy who could repair broken toys or appliances. He could repair hearts too. As he lay there, his mind began to wander, thinking about all the people in his neighborhood, in his town, who were struggling. There were so many who were lost or lonely, so many who needed something to hold on to. And he, Marcus Walker, had the ability to offer that. He wasn't just going to be the handyman anymore. He was going to be someone who helped people rebuild, not just physically, but emotionally. Maybe, just maybe, he could start making a difference in a bigger way. The following morning, when Marcus woke up, he felt a renewed sense of determination. The sun was barely rising, and the air outside was still cool, the kind of morning that felt like anything was possible. Marcus knew it was time to take his talent further, to do something that could have an even bigger impact. He decided he would go into town, visit a few of the shops, and ask if anyone needed help. He was ready to take the next step. When he stepped into the kitchen, Sarah was already sitting at the table, sipping her coffee and reading the local newspaper. Her tired eyes softened as she looked up at her son, who was unusually quiet. "Morning, Mom," Marcus said, his voice a little quieter than usual. "Morning, baby," Sarah replied, her voice full of warmth. She set the paper down, noticing the thoughtful expression on her son's face. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before sitting down across from her. He wasn't used to talking about his feelings, but today felt different. "I've been thinking, Mom, about how I can do more, about how I can really make a difference." Sarah smiled gently. "I think you already do, Marcus. You've been making a difference your whole life, one small step at a time." But Marcus shook his head, his mind racing. "I know, but it's not enough anymore. I've been fixing things, but I want to do something bigger, something that really matters. I want to help people, not just with repairs, but in ways that go deeper. I want to fix broken lives too." Sarah reached over and placed her hand on his. "Marcus," she said softly, "you've always had that gift. The way you make people feel seen, the way you listen to them. That's something rare, and I know it'll take you far." Marcus looked into his mother's eyes, feeling both reassured and terrified at the same time. He had always trusted her wisdom, but this felt different. It felt like a turning point, and he wasn't sure what was on the other side. But the thought of helping others, of truly making a difference, filled him with a quiet excitement. Later that day, Marcus walked down the familiar streets of Maplewood, his toolbox swinging by his side. The neighborhood felt different today. Maybe it was the way the sun hit the pavement, or maybe it was the realization that everything he had known was about to change. He stopped at Mr. Johnson's garden, where the older man was kneeling, tending to his roses. Mr. Johnson had always been kind to Marcus, ever since he was a little boy. "Hey there, Marcus," Mr. Johnson greeted him, looking up from his flowers. "How's everything going?" "Good, Mr. Johnson," Marcus replied with a smile. "Actually, I was wondering if you knew anyone who might need some help. Not just fixing things, but, I don't know, just helping out. You know, people in town who might be struggling, maybe with more than just broken things." Mr. Johnson raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "You're talking about more than just repairs, huh?" "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice steady with newfound purpose. "I want to help people in a bigger way." Mr. Johnson paused for a moment, as if weighing the boy's words carefully. "You've always been a good kid, Marcus. You've got the right heart. There are plenty of people in this town who could use someone like you. Maybe start by talking to people around here. Get to know their stories." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of Mr. Johnson's words settle deep inside him. He knew that this was the first step towards something bigger than just fixing things. It was about building trust, about helping others feel seen and valued, just as he had seen and valued Lily's tears of joy. Over the next few weeks, Marcus spent his time talking to people around town, listening to their stories, and offering help when needed. He helped Mrs. Green with her grocery shopping, even though she had never asked for help before. He visited Mr. Caldwell, who had lost his wife the year before, and spent an afternoon fixing his old rocking chair while they talked about the past. Every small gesture, every moment of connection, made Marcus realize that there was so much more he could offer. One day, after helping Mrs. Green fix her fence, Marcus was walking home when he heard someone calling his name. He turned around and saw Lily running towards him, her face lit up with the same joy she had shown when the music box played again. "Marcus! Marcus, wait!" she shouted, breathless. When she caught up to him, she smiled shyly. I just wanted to say thank you again for fixing my music box. I play it every night before bed now, and it's like I can feel my grandma's love in the music. You really did something amazing." Marcus felt a lump in his throat. "I'm glad it makes you happy, Lily. That's all I ever wanted." Her eyes sparkled as she hugged him tightly. "You're a hero, Marcus. A real hero." Marcus stood there, feeling the weight of her words in his chest. Maybe he wasn't just fixing things. Maybe he was becoming the kind of person who could heal hearts too. And with that, Marcus knew that no matter what came next, he was ready to face it. He wasn't just a boy who could fix broken objects. He was someone who could change lives piece by piece. As Marcus continued his journey, he began to notice the subtle changes in the way people interacted with him. It wasn't just about the work anymore. He had earned something deeper, the respect of his community. The more he helped, the more he realized that people weren't just looking for repairs. They were searching for connection. And Marcus had become the bridge they needed, offering more than just his hands, but his heart. One afternoon, as Marcus walked through Maplewood's main street, he caught sight of Mrs. Thompson standing outside her shop. She was struggling to unload a heavy crate of supplies from her car. Marcus, always quick to lend a hand, jogged over to her. "Let me help you with that, Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice light but sincere. Mrs. Thompson smiled, relieved. "You always seem to show up just when I need you, Marcus." As he lifted the crate with ease, Marcus noticed the exhaustion in her eyes. The lines around her face had deepened over the years, and she looked more worn than he remembered. He set the crate down and looked at her with concern. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Thompson? You seem tired." She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "It's just been a tough few months, Marcus. Between managing the shop and taking care of my sick mother, it's all getting a bit much." Marcus paused. He had always known Mrs. Thompson as strong and independent, but hearing her speak so openly made him realize how much she had been holding inside. "I'm sorry to hear that," Marcus said quietly. "If there's anything I can do to help, don't hesitate to ask." Mrs. Thompson smiled warmly at him, her tired eyes softening. Thank you, Marcus. Your kindness means more than you know. As he walked away, Marcus felt a deep sense of empathy for the people around him. It wasn't just about fixing things anymore. It was about lifting the burdens that people carried, sometimes without even realizing how much they needed help. The more he gave, the more he received in return, not in material things, but in trust, in connection, and in understanding. A few days later, Marcus was at the local coffee shop when he ran into Lily again. She was sitting by the window, her eyes scanning the pages of a book, her fingers tracing the edges of the worn cover. When she saw Marcus, her face lit up. "Marcus!" "Hey," she waved him over. "Come sit with me. I want to show you something." Marcus smiled and made his way over to her. As he sat down, Lily excitedly pushed the book toward him. "It's a journal I started keeping," she said. "I've been writing in it every day. About everything. About my grandma, the music box, and, well, a lot of things." Marcus looked at the journal in front of him. It was simple but filled with depth, the pages showing her careful handwriting and little sketches of things that seemed to matter to her. "I think it's a way of keeping her alive, you know?" Lily said softly, her voice laced with the bittersweet pain of loss. "Whenever I feel lost or sad, I write in it. It helps me remember the good times with her." Marcus was struck by the maturity in her voice, the way she had found a way to cope with grief. It reminded him of his own journey, the way he had learned to find strength in helping others, even when he was struggling himself. "That's really beautiful, Lily," Marcus said sincerely. "Your grandma would be proud of you." Lily smiled shyly, looking down at her journal. "I hope so. I hope she's proud of me for keeping her memory alive." The conversation shifted, and Marcus began to share some of his own thoughts. His dreams of helping more people, of creating a space where he could offer more than just repairs. He told Lily about the idea of opening a small repair shop, but also a community space, a place where people could come and talk, share their stories, and find comfort in the simple act of being seen. "I want to do more than just fix things," Marcus said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "I want to fix lives too. Help people heal from the inside, not just the outside." Lily listened intently, her eyes wide with admiration. "You're already doing that, Marcus. You've already helped so many people." Marcus shook his head, a humble smile tugging at his lips. "I haven't done enough. There's always more to do, always more people to help." Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked tirelessly to bring his vision to life. He began to look for a small space where he could start his repair shop, but he also started thinking about the other ways he could help. He reached out to local organizations and began volunteering, offering his services to those who needed it most. His idea of helping people in a bigger way was becoming more real by the day. Through his work, Marcus met many more people who had stories similar to his own, stories of struggle, loss, and resilience. He realized that the true meaning of his work wasn't just about fixing broken objects. It was about helping people reclaim their sense of self, their strength, and their hope. And that, he believed, was the most important kind of repair. One day, Marcus received a letter from Mr. Patterson, the father of Lily, asking him to come to their house. When Marcus arrived, he was greeted warmly by the family, who had been following his progress closely. "Marcus, we've been thinking about you a lot," Mr. Patterson said, his voice filled with sincerity. "What you're doing, the way you're helping people, it's truly remarkable. And we want to help you too." Mrs. Patterson handed him a piece of paper. "This is a small donation to help you get your business off the ground. But it's more than that. We want to help you make your dream come true. We believe in what you're doing, Marcus." Marcus was overwhelmed. The generosity of the Pattersons wasn't just in the money. It was in the belief they had in him, in his vision. It was a moment that solidified everything he had been working toward. This wasn't just about fixing broken things anymore. It was about building something new, something that could change the lives of everyone around him. With their support, Marcus's dream began to take shape. The space he had found was small, but it was perfect. He transformed it into a welcoming space, with a repair shop in the back and a comfortable area up front where people could gather. He offered free services to those in need and began hosting community events where people could share their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. As Marcus continued to grow his business and his community, he realized that what he had created was more than just a place of repairs. It was a place of healing. And with every person he helped, Marcus knew he was on the right path. His journey was just beginning, but the impact he had already made was profound. Marcus Walker was no longer just the boy with a toolbox. He had become a symbol of hope, compassion, and the belief that with a little help, anyone could rebuild their life one piece at a time. Marcus's new journey as the owner of his repair shop had only just begun, but he felt an overwhelming sense of purpose that made every challenge worth facing. The building, while small, had been transformed into a welcoming space, filled with the sounds of people talking, tools clicking, and the soft hum of machines working. Marcus had made sure it was a place of comfort, not just for fixing broken items, but for healing fractured spirits as well. In the mornings, the shop was filled with the familiar hum of repairs. People came in with broken radios, worn-down furniture, and forgotten heirlooms. Each object carried with it a story, a piece of the lives it had touched, and Marcus listened. He listened not just with his ears, but with his heart. He knew the real work was never just in the fixing. It was in the connection he made with each person, in the understanding of their past, their pain, their hope. One afternoon, as Marcus worked on a bicycle for Mr. Caldwell, an elderly man who had recently lost his wife, the doorbell jingled, and in walked someone he didn't recognize. The man was tall, well-dressed, with a stern look on his face. He had the air of someone used to being in charge, his presence commanding without a word. "Good afternoon," the man said, his voice deep, but not unkind. "I'm Alan Fields. I heard you were the best when it comes to repairs. I need a favor." Marcus looked up from his work, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm happy to help. What can I do for you, Mr. Fields?" Alan set a small, ornate box on the counter. It was a beautifully crafted wooden box, with intricate carvings along the edges and a polished surface that reflected the light. "I've had this for years," Alan said, his tone softer now. "It belonged to my late mother. I never thought it needed fixing, but it's broken in a way I can't understand. It doesn't open anymore, and I don't want to risk damaging it further." Marcus studied the box, running his fingers along its smooth surface. It wasn't like the usual repairs he worked on. This wasn't an item meant to be fixed. It was a piece of someone's soul, a relic that carried memories and emotions far beyond its form. "I'll take a look at it," Marcus said gently, his mind already turning over the problem. He carefully opened the lid, inspecting the mechanism inside. It was delicate, intricate, and old, the kind of thing that needed careful hands and a respectful touch. As he worked, Alan stood quietly watching him. Marcus could feel the man's gaze on him, but he didn't mind. Alan wasn't just watching the repair. He was watching the process of healing, watching his own memories being handled with care. There was something about Marcus's calm presence that made the man trust him, something beyond the skill in his hands. "It's not just about fixing things, is it?" Alan asked quietly after a moment. Marcus looked up, meeting his eyes. "No, it never is." Alan's gaze softened. He had been to many repair shops in his time, but none of them felt like this. This wasn't just a place where broken objects were mended. It was a place where broken hearts were too. Over the next few weeks, Alan continued to visit the shop. Each time, he brought something new, a piece of furniture from his childhood, an old clock, a faded picture frame. Each object had a story, a connection to his past, and slowly, Alan began to open up to Marcus about his life. "I didn't grow up like you, Marcus," Alan said one day, as he sat across from him while Marcus worked. "I didn't have the luxury of a tight-knit community. My family wasn't like that. We didn't help each other. We kept to ourselves." Marcus nodded, understanding. "I know what that feels like. But you're here now, and you're opening up." Alan's eyes flickered, as if he were about to argue, but he let the words sit with him. It was true. He had come to trust Marcus, something he hadn't done with anyone in years. "You're different," Alan said finally. "This place, it's different. I've never seen anyone work with so much heart before." As the days passed, word continued to spread about Marcus's shop. It wasn't just about repairs anymore. It was about healing, community, and the simple act of being seen. People came in with all kinds of broken things, but Marcus never turned anyone away. His heart was as much a part of the work as his hands. One day, Mrs. Green came by, a regular at the shop. She had brought in a small, old vase that had been in her family for generations. It had cracked in half, and Mrs. Green had been unable to bear throwing it away. "Marcus, I don't know if you can fix this," she said hesitantly, holding the vase in both hands. "But it means so much to me. It belonged to my mother." Marcus took the vase from her hands and examined it closely. It was delicate, intricate, and fragile. But there was something in the way it had been cracked. It wasn't beyond saving. Marcus knew just what to do. "I'll fix it," he said with a calm assurance, looking up at her. "It's not beyond saving." As Marcus worked, he thought about how much like that vase Mrs. Green was fragile, cracked, yet full of memories, full of value. And just like that vase, she could be healed too if only someone took the time to care. When he finished, he handed it back to her, the cracks carefully mended and the vase looking as good as new. Mrs. Green's eyes filled with tears as she held the vase in her hands. "Thank you, Marcus," she whispered. "You've not only fixed it, you've fixed a part of me too." Marcus smiled, feeling the deep connection that had formed in that small moment. This was more than just fixing things. It was about giving people back the parts of themselves they had forgotten or lost. As Marcus's shop grew, so did his sense of purpose. He knew that this wasn't just a job. It was a calling. The more he helped, the more he realized that the work he did wasn't just about fixing broken things. It was about restoring lives one piece at a time. And as the people of Maplewood came to him for help, for repairs, for a listening ear, Marcus knew he had found his place in the world. It wasn't about the recognition, the business, or the things he fixed. It was about being there for others when they needed it the most. There was a quiet fulfillment that came with each repair, each act of kindness, and Marcus felt it deep in his soul. He wasn't just fixing the world's broken things. He was helping others fix themselves. The word about Marcus's repair shop continued to spread, and more people from outside Maplewood began to take notice. What had started as a small, community-focused endeavor had blossomed into something much larger than he had ever imagined. His shop became a sanctuary for those not only looking to repair their possessions, but also those searching for something deeper: connection, understanding, and a sense of belonging. One afternoon, as Marcus was polishing a vintage clock that had been passed down through several generations, a young woman entered the shop. She was dressed in a business suit, her expression a mix of determination and weariness. She walked up to the counter, and Marcus looked up from his work, wiping his hands on a rag. "Hi," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "I need your help. I heard you're the one to come to when things need fixing." Marcus smiled softly, his eyes welcoming. "I try to be. What can I do for you?" The woman, whose name was Clara, explained that she had inherited a beautiful, hand-carved jewelry box from her grandmother, a family heirloom. It was small, intricate, and precious to her, but it had suffered damage during a move. The box had cracked, and its hinges were broken. She explained that she had tried to get it fixed elsewhere, but no one could repair it properly. It was as if the value of the box was not just in its craftsmanship, but in the memories it held, the connection it represented to her past. "I know this might sound silly," Clara said hesitantly, "but it's more than just a box. It's the only thing I have left from my grandmother. I don't want to lose it. Can you fix it?" Marcus studied the box carefully. The damage was significant, but not beyond repair. The intricacies of the craftsmanship were delicate, the kind of work that required patience and care. He could see the sentimental value in the way Clara held it so carefully, as if she were holding onto the last piece of her connection to her grandmother. "It's not a problem," Marcus said, his voice reassuring. "I'll take good care of it." Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt, but Marcus's calm demeanor gave her the confidence she needed. She handed him the box, and as she did, their fingers brushed briefly. Clara's gaze softened as she looked at him. She could see that this wasn't just a job to Marcus. It was personal. It was clear that he understood the value of this box, not just as an object, but as a piece of someone's heart. For the next several hours, Marcus worked carefully on the jewelry box. He wasn't just fixing the visible damage. He was repairing the silent history woven into every fiber of the wood, every carved detail. As he worked, his mind drifted to his own family. His mother, who had always been there for him, and his late grandfather, who had passed on the same care and understanding to him that he was now passing on to others. When Clara returned, Marcus had the box ready. He placed it gently on the counter and opened it for her. The box had been restored to its original state, every crack mended, the hinges working perfectly. It was more than just a repaired object. It was a restored piece of her past. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "You did it," she whispered. "You really fixed it. It's like my grandmother's right here with me again." Marcus watched her, a quiet pride filling his chest. "I'm glad I could help." Clara's tears weren't from sadness. They were from a deep, quiet joy, a relief that her most precious memory had been saved. She had feared that she had lost something irreplaceable, but Marcus had given it back to her. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't explain how much this means to me." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. It's never just about the object. It's about what it represents, the memories, the love, the connections. That's what matters most. Clara smiled, her heart full. "You're right, and you've made me realize something important. We all have things that matter more than we know, things that hold our memories, our stories. I won't take that for granted again." As Clara left the shop, a new feeling lingered in the air. Marcus knew that every day, his small acts of kindness and his ability to fix things were having a far-reaching impact on the people who walked through his door. It wasn't just about repairing broken items. It was about restoring what had been lost and giving people a sense of hope. The community around Marcus continued to grow, and as he became more involved with local projects and organizations, he began to see how his work connected him to something larger. One day, Mrs. Green came by with a small group of elderly women from the local community center. They had heard about Marcus's work and wanted to see for themselves what made his shop so special. "We've heard a lot about you, Marcus," Mrs. Green said, introducing him to the group. "We've got a little project for you if you're up for it." Marcus smiled, looking around at the group of women, all of whom seemed to have their own stories and histories. They each carried something with them, an item that had meaning to them, but that was now damaged or broken. They were looking for someone to help them preserve their memories, and Marcus knew exactly what to do. For the next several weeks, Marcus worked with the group, fixing their old, cherished items, worn quilts, faded photographs, cracked porcelain figurines, and more. Each item carried a lifetime of memories, and each repair was a way to honor those stories. The women were grateful, but they also shared stories of their own lives, and Marcus listened. It wasn't just about the repairs. It was about the moments they shared together, the sense of community, and the shared understanding that every object had a story of value beyond its physical form. As the group gathered around in the shop one afternoon, Mrs. Green looked at Marcus with a deep, knowing smile. "You know, Marcus," she said softly, "what you're doing here isn't just fixing things. You're bringing this community together. You're restoring our hearts." Marcus's heart swelled with gratitude. He had never thought about it that way before. To him, it had always been about the repairs, about fixing things, about making things right. But now, he realized that what he was really doing was much bigger. He was restoring connections between people, between memories, between hearts. The work in the shop continued, and every day Marcus found new ways to serve his community, helping not only to fix objects, but also to rebuild relationships, trust, and understanding. Through his hands, he restored not just items, but the pieces of people's lives that had been forgotten or neglected. And in doing so, he found that the more he helped others, the more he helped himself. With each passing day, Marcus knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The work was hard, but it was rewarding in ways he had never imagined. And he realized with each act of kindness, with every repair, he was building something much more than a business. He was building a legacy of hope, of care, and of love. As Marcus continued to pour his heart into his shop, the community around him flourished in ways he had never anticipated. It wasn't just about the repairs anymore. It was about the connections, the conversations, and the healing that took place in the small space that had once only been a place of work. The shop had transformed into a sanctuary, a place where people came not just to fix their belongings, but to share their stories, their struggles, and their victories. One morning, as Marcus was cleaning his workbench, The door opened, and a familiar face walked in. It was Alan Fields, the man who had brought the broken jewelry box to him months ago. Alan was carrying a new item this time, an old leather-bound book with a cracked spine. He set it down gently on the counter, his face filled with a mixture of hesitation and hope. "Marcus," Alan said, his voice softer than usual, "I don't know if you can fix this, but this book, it's my father's. It's the only thing I have left from him, and it's falling apart." Marcus picked up the book, its pages yellowed with age, the leather cover worn from years of use. The book was more than just a family heirloom. It was a symbol of Alan's connection to his father, someone he had lost long ago. The sentimental value was immeasurable, and Marcus knew that repairing it would require more than just his hands. It would require his heart. "I'll do my best, Alan," Marcus said, his voice steady. "This isn't just a book. It's a memory. I'll treat it with the care it deserves." Alan nodded, his eyes clouded with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you, Marcus. I don't think I could ever let go of this. My father was a difficult man, but he was also the only father I had. This book, it's all that's left of him." As Marcus set to work, carefully stitching the book's spine and gently reinforcing the binding, he thought about the people he had met through his shop. Everyone who came to him had their own story, their own history, and Marcus had come to understand that it wasn't just the objects they brought that mattered. It was the meaning behind them. Each item carried memories, relationships, and emotions that ran deep. The weeks that followed brought more challenges, but also more moments of connection. As Marcus continued to work on Alan's book, the man came by often to check on its progress. With each visit, the walls around Alan seemed to soften a little more. The repairs were no longer just about fixing an object. They were about something deeper, something that Marcus had begun to understand. People came to him not just for help with their broken things, but for help with their broken selves. One afternoon, Alan sat down across from Marcus as he worked, his face serious. "Marcus," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said that day, about fixing lives, not just things." Marcus looked up from his work, meeting Alan's gaze. "What's on your mind?" Alan took a deep breath. "I never thought I needed to fix anything in my life. But I've realized something. I've been holding on to so much anger for so many years. Anger at my father, at the way I was raised, at the things I never had. But you're right. It's not just about fixing the past. It's about healing." Marcus nodded, sensing the depth of Alan's words. "It's never easy, but healing is possible. Sometimes it takes a long time to realize what we need to fix, and sometimes we need a little help along the way." Alan's face softened, and for the first time, Marcus saw a hint of vulnerability in the man's eyes. "I think I've been afraid of letting go, afraid that if I forgive, if I try to heal, I'll lose something. But I realize now that holding on to this pain is what's really holding me back." Marcus smiled gently, continuing to work on the book. "It's not about losing anything. It's about finding peace, finding the strength to move forward without carrying the weight of the past." As the repairs on the book neared completion, Marcus began to see Alan in a new light. The man who had walked into his shop months ago with a stern, guarded expression had slowly opened up layer by layer through their conversations, their shared moments of understanding. And Marcus realized that, in many ways, this journey of repair was not just for the items brought to him, but for the people too. When Alan finally came to pick up the book, Marcus handed it over with a quiet sense of pride. The book was now restored, its spine strong, its pages intact. But more than that, it was a symbol of something Alan had started to repair within himself. "This is perfect, Marcus," Alan said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just fix a book. You helped me start fixing things that I didn't even know needed fixing." Marcus met his gaze, the weight of the moment settling between them. "I'm glad I could help," he said quietly. Alan stood there for a moment, the book in his hands, and then he extended his hand to Marcus. "You've done more for me than I can ever express, Marcus. You've helped me more than anyone else ever has." Marcus took Alan's hand firmly, feeling the strength in the gesture. "We all need help, Alan. It's never too late to start fixing the things that matter." As the days went on, Marcus continued to nurture his shop, knowing that each day brought him closer to the larger mission, he had quietly set for himself. His community had grown stronger through his work, and Marcus had found that the more he gave, the more he received in return. Not in the form of money or recognition, but in the form of trust, connection, and shared experiences. One evening, as Marcus was locking up the shop for the night, he saw Mrs. Green walking down the street with a group of the elderly women from the community center. They were laughing together, their arms linked, walking slowly but with a sense of joy. "Marcus," Mrs. Green called, waving him over. "We've been talking, and we wanted to thank you properly. You've done so much for all of us. You've brought us together. You've helped us remember the value of community." Marcus smiled, feeling the warmth of their words. "I'm just doing what I can." "But it's more than that," Mrs. Green said, her eyes twinkling. "You've shown us how important it is to heal, not just ourselves, but each other. We've all been carrying so much for so long, and you've helped us realize that the most important repairs are the ones we make to our hearts." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected this, but he understood it now. The community was no longer just a group of people. It was a family, and Marcus had become the glue that held them together. "Thank you, Marcus," Mrs. Green said, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "You've given us more than we could ever repay." Marcus looked at the group, the women who had shared their stories, their pains, their joys with him. And he realized that he hadn't just fixed things. He had helped fix lives, one small act of kindness at a time. And with that realization, he knew that he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. Marcus's journey was far from over. There were still many challenges to face, many people who needed his help. But for the first time, he knew that no matter what came next, he was ready. He had found his purpose, and with it, a deeper understanding of the world and the people around him. He was more than a boy with a toolbox. He was a man who could rebuild not just things, but lives. The word about Marcus's work had spread beyond the confines of Maplewood, and with it, the subtle recognition of his mission to heal through connection. As the seasons shifted, the pace of life in the town seemed to slow, but Marcus's shop was a constant beacon of activity. Each day brought in new faces and stories, each one more unique than the last. He had become not just the local repairman, but a trusted figure in the community, a person others turned to not just for fixing things, but for comfort, understanding, and the reassurance that, even in brokenness, there was always hope. One chilly afternoon, as Marcus was carefully restoring an old rocking chair for Mrs. Thompson, a man in his mid-40s entered the shop. His appearance was somewhat disheveled, his clothes worn, but there was something in his eyes that caught Marcus's attention. The man hesitated at the door, scanning the space as if unsure whether he belonged. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, wiping his hands on his apron as he approached. The man seemed taken aback by the question, but quickly gathered himself. "I heard you could fix anything," he said, his voice rough, as though he hadn't spoken much lately. I need your help." Marcus nodded, motioning toward a chair by the counter. "Sure. What's the problem?" The man sat down, and after a moment's pause, he pulled a small wooden box from his bag and set it gently on the counter. It was nothing extraordinary, just a small, plain box with a lock, but there was something in the way he looked at it that suggested it held a great deal of significance. "This belonged to my brother," the man began, his voice softening. "He passed away a few months ago. I don't know what happened, but the lock's broken, and I can't get it open. I need to know what's inside. I need closure." Marcus studied the box, sensing the weight of the man's words. It was clear that this wasn't just about a broken lock. It was about a relationship, a connection to someone who was no longer there. "I'll do my best," Marcus said gently, his hands already working to examine the lock. "We'll see what we can do." As Marcus worked, the man remained silent, watching every move he made. There was an unspoken tension in the air, a quiet understanding that this was more than just a repair. The box had been a piece of the man's brother, a part of their shared history, and now, with it broken, the man felt a sense of lost connection. Marcus carefully worked the lock free, using all the patience and focus he had learned from years of repairing objects and building trust with people. It wasn't just about getting the box open. It was about the trust the man had placed in him to help him face something painful, something unresolved. Finally, After what felt like hours of slow, steady work, Marcus carefully lifted the lid of the box. Inside, there was nothing but a few scraps of old paper and a small, faded photograph of the man and his brother as children, smiling brightly. For a moment, Marcus felt a wave of quiet reverence in the room. It wasn't just the box he had opened. It was the door to a past that the man had been holding on to. The man exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging with a mixture of relief and sorrow. He picked up the photograph, holding it gently in his hands as though it were the most fragile thing in the world. "That's us," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Before we drifted apart, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be that happy." Marcus nodded, stepping back to give the man some space. He knew that this moment, this small act of kindness, was more important than any repair he had done. It wasn't just about fixing objects. It was about giving people back pieces of themselves that they had lost. "I'm glad I could help," Marcus said quietly. The man looked up at him, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know what to say. I thought I'd never find peace with this. But you've given me something I didn't even realize I needed." As the man left the shop, the photograph tucked safely in his coat pocket, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why he did what he did, not for the recognition or the thanks, but for the small moments of healing, the connections he could help restore, the pieces of people's lives that he could help put back together. The shop continued to thrive, and Marcus continued to see the same pattern unfold. People came to him with things that were broken, not just their belongings, but parts of their hearts, their memories, and their pasts. And with each item, Marcus saw the opportunity to do something more than just fix it. He saw the opportunity to restore, to heal, and to connect. One afternoon, as he worked on a broken lamp for a young woman named Sarah, she sat quietly at the counter, watching him work. Sarah had come to the shop many times before, always with small things, nothing too significant. But today she seemed different. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, noticing the way she fidgeted with her hands. Sarah hesitated before speaking. I'm not sure where I'm going anymore. I've been carrying around this weight, and I don't know how to let it go." Marcus set the lamp down, wiping his hands. "I know what that feels like. Sometimes it's hard to know what to do with the things we carry." She nodded, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I lost my father a few years ago, and lately I've been thinking about all the things I never said to him, things I should have said, things I left unresolved." Marcus understood the pain in her voice. He had heard similar stories many times before, and he knew that the path to healing wasn't always clear. "It's never easy," he said gently, "but sometimes the best thing we can do is start by forgiving ourselves. And then if we can, we try to find a way to make peace with the past." Sarah took a deep breath, as though she were hearing the words for the first time. "I don't know if I can forgive myself for all the things I didn't do." "You can," Marcus said, his voice steady with conviction. "It takes time, but you can, and you don't have to do it alone. There's no shame in reaching out and asking for help." For a long while, Sarah sat in silence, her gaze fixed on the floor. But when she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, but steadier. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to start letting go." The days passed, and the more Marcus interacted with people, the more he saw how deeply his work was intertwined with their lives. Each repair was a conversation, a small act of care that rippled outward, touching more than just the object at hand. He realized that what he had created was more than just a shop. It was a space where healing happened, where people came together, shared their stories, and worked through their pain, piece by piece. And for the first time, Marcus truly understood the depth of his purpose. He wasn't just fixing things. He was helping others find their way back to themselves. He was offering them a chance to heal, to reconnect, and to start anew. As the seasons changed and the shop continued to thrive, Marcus's legacy grew. Not in the repairs he made, but in the lives he touched, the hearts he mended, and the community he helped rebuild, one broken piece at a time. The shop had grown into a true cornerstone of the community. Marcus's name had become synonymous with not just repairs, but with hope. People no longer just walked into his shop with broken items. They came with their burdens, their stories, their silent struggles, seeking more than just physical fixes. They sought connection, understanding, and a reminder that there was still goodness in the world. One cold winter's morning, as Marcus was preparing his workbench for the day, he heard the soft creak of the door opening. He looked up to see a familiar face, Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly widow who had been a frequent visitor to the shop over the past year. Her visits were never about the repairs. They were always about sharing a cup of tea, a conversation, and the comforting presence of someone who listened. "Good morning, Mrs. Jenkins." Marcus greeted her with a smile. "What can I help you with today?" She stepped inside, her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, and placed a small box on the counter. It wasn't like the usual items people brought to him. This was a delicate, worn photograph album. The leather binding was cracked, and the pages had yellowed with age, but Marcus could see that it held deep sentimental value. "I'm not sure if this is something you can fix, Marcus," Mrs. Jenkins said quietly, "but it's the only thing I have left from my late husband. It's all our memories, our life together. I can't bear to lose it." Marcus carefully picked up the album, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just a repair. It was a preservation of a lifetime's worth of memories. He knew how important it was to her, and he understood the responsibility that came with it. "I'll take good care of it," he said gently. "Let me see what I can do." As he worked, he could feel the quiet sense of reverence that came with the task. The album was more than just a collection of photos. It was a time capsule, a tribute to a love that had been lost but not forgotten. As he carefully restored the pages, reattaching them where the old glue had weakened, he thought about the relationships that had shaped his own life. His mother, his grandfather, the community he had built. And now, Mrs. Jenkins, who had entrusted him with her most cherished memories. The more Marcus repaired, the more he realized that his work was creating a deeper bond between him and the people of Maplewood. It was no longer just about fixing broken objects. It was about creating lasting connections. He wasn't just mending things, he was mending hearts. Every person who came into his shop, whether with a broken vase or a cracked heart, found something more than just a repair. They found someone who cared. As the weeks passed, a man named Thomas entered the shop. He was a quiet man, perhaps in his late 30s, with a weathered face that spoke of years of hard work and little rest. He carried a small, worn box under his arm and approached the counter. "Can you fix this?" Thomas asked, his voice low. Marcus took the box from his hands, inspecting it closely. It was a simple wooden box, but the craftsmanship was elegant and the hinge was broken. The man's eyes followed Marcus's every movement, his anxiety palpable. "What's inside?" Marcus asked, his curiosity piqued. Thomas hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It was my father's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He passed away last year. It's all I have left of him. I don't know what to do with it, but I know it has to be fixed. It's the only thing I have that still feels like a piece of him." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He could see the pain in Thomas's eyes, the grief that still lingered, the sense of loss that hadn't yet healed. "I'll do my best," Marcus said, his voice steady, though his heart ached for the man. As he worked, Marcus thought about the quiet struggles people faced every day. The grief, the loss, the things left unsaid. He worked on the box carefully, taking his time, because he understood that this was more than just fixing a broken object. It was about helping someone hold on to what mattered most. When the repair was finished, Marcus handed the box back to Thomas. It was as good as new, its hinges working smoothly, the wood restored to its original condition. Thomas took the box with trembling hands, his eyes filling with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You don't know what this means to me. I thought I'd lost it all, but you've given me something back." Marcus simply nodded, his heart full. He knew that this was the true reward, the quiet moments of gratitude, the deep connections formed through small acts of kindness. He wasn't just fixing things, he was helping people hold on to the pieces of their past, the things that mattered most. As time went on, Marcus's shop became a hub of activity. He wasn't just a repairman. He had become a counselor, a friend, a confidant to the people who walked through his door. He continued to repair objects, but more importantly, he continued to repair lives, one small act of kindness at a time. One afternoon, a young woman named Rachel came into the shop. She was in her early 20s, and her eyes were filled with a mixture of sadness and uncertainty. She carried a small, beaten-up guitar case, the leather scratched and worn. "I don't know if you can help me," Rachel said, her voice hesitant. "But this guitar belonged to my brother. He passed away a few months ago, and I haven't been able to play it since. It's all I have left of him." Marcus gently took the guitar case from her, his hands instinctively treating it with the care it deserved. He knew that this was more than just a repair. It was a way for Rachel to keep her brother's memory alive. The guitar wasn't just an instrument. It was a bridge between her past and her present. "I can fix it," Marcus said, looking up at her with a reassuring smile. "It'll be good as new." As he worked, Marcus reflected on the fragile nature of life, the way things, people, and memories could slip away before we were ready. But in those quiet moments, when he helped someone like Rachel, he understood that even in loss, there was a chance for healing. He wasn't just restoring guitars. He was helping people reclaim a part of their lives that had been lost, a piece of their heart that they could hold on to. With every repair, every story shared, Marcus's understanding of his purpose deepened. He realized that this wasn't just a job. It was a calling. He wasn't just mending broken objects. He was mending hearts, offering solace to those who needed it most, and building a community where people could heal together. As the shop continued to thrive, so did Marcus's understanding of what it meant to live a life of service, to repair, to heal, and to bring light into the darkest corners of the world. He knew that no matter what came next, he was ready. Because in fixing things, Marcus had discovered the greatest repair of all, the repair of the soul.